Now let's discuss another situation in which you will be multiplying binomials, and that will require you to simplify the product that you get. A binomial is a term that has two parts. So when you're multiplying two binomials, we want to utilize a method known as the FOIL method. The FOIL method is a technique used to remember the steps required to multiply two binomials. So FOIL stands for first, outside, inside, and last. F-O-I-L, FOIL. So when you hear that, this can help direct you to which terms you should be multiplying. So you want to multiply this first term times each term inside this set of parentheses here. And then you want to multiply the second term by each of these terms as well. So if you multiply the first terms first, the first term in the first set of parentheses times the first term in the second set of parentheses. A times C would give you AC. O stands for outside. A times D will give you AD. Then I stands for inside. So we are now moving to the second term in our first binomial, and we're multiplying it times the first term in the second binomial. We're multiplying the inside terms. And then lastly, you multiply B times the second term in the second set of parentheses, D. B times D will give you BD. So again, FOIL stands for first. Multiply the first term in each set of parentheses, A times C. O is outside. A times D gives you AD. I is for inside. B times C gives you BC. And L stands for last, the last term in each binomial. B times D gives you BD. Let's take a look at an example of multiplying two binomial terms. Evaluate and simplify 4 radical 5 plus 2 radical 3 times 6 radical 5 minus 7 radical 3. So step 1, use the FOIL method to expand the expression. So F stands for first. So we're going to multiply the first term in the first binomial times the first term in the second binomial. When you're multiplying radicals, you multiply the coefficients times each other. 4 times 6 gives you 24. You then multiply the radicals. Radical 5 times radical 5 will give you radical 25, or the square root of 25, which is equal to 5. 24 times 5 gives you 120. You then go to the outside terms. 4 times negative 7 gives you a coefficient of negative 28. And radical 5 times radical 3 will give you radical 15. You then multiply the inside terms. 2 times 6 will give you a coefficient of 12. And radical 3 times radical 5 gives you radical 15. Then lastly, the last terms. 2 times negative 7 will give you a coefficient of negative 14. And radical 3 times radical 3 gives you 3. Negative 14 times 3 will give you negative 42. So once you expand the expression by using the FOIL method, you have 120 minus 28 radical 15 plus 12 radical 15 minus 42. So the next step is to combine the like terms. So you'll do 120 minus 42. And then you combine the radicals that have the same radicand. So these are both radical 15. So you can combine the coefficients, negative 28 and positive 12, to give you negative 16 radical 15. 120 minus 42 is 78. So 4 radical 5 plus 2 radical 3 times 6 radical 5 minus 7 radical 3 is equal to 78 minus 16 radical 15. So that is how you would use the FOIL method. Let's have you try a few practice questions. Evaluate and simplify. Question number 1. 3 radical 7 minus 4 radical 6 times 9 radical 6 minus 2 radical 7. Question number 2. Negative 5 radical 2 plus 10 radical 3 times 8 radical 2 minus 7 radical 3. Question number 3. 3i radical 2 minus 5 radical negative 8 times negative 4 radical negative 8 plus 6i radical 2. Pause the video, answer these questions, and then press play when you are ready to begin. Question number 1. Step 1. Use the FOIL method to expand the expression. So the F in FOIL stands for first, which lets you know you want to multiply the first term in the first binomial times the first term in the second binomial. When we do so, we want to multiply our coefficients first, 3 and 9. 3 times 9 will give you 27. And then you multiply your radicands. Radical 7 times radical 6 will give you radical 7 times 6, which is radical 42. You then go to the outside terms. The O in FOIL stands for outside. So the first and the last term. 3 times negative 2 gives you a coefficient of negative 6. Radical 7 times radical 7 gives you 7. Negative 6 times 7 is negative 42. You then move to the inside terms. Negative 4 times 9 gives you a coefficient of negative 36. Radical 6 times radical 6 gives you 6. Negative 36 times 6 is negative 216. And then you multiply the last terms in each binomial. Negative 4 times negative 2 gives you a coefficient of positive 8. Radical 6 times radical 7 gives you radical 42. So now that we've expanded the expression, the next step is to combine the like terms. So you want to combine the radicals that have the same radicand. So these both have a radicand of 42, so we can combine their coefficients, positive 8 and positive 27, to get positive 35, radical 42. And negative 42 minus 216 gives you negative 258. So the final answer is negative 258 plus 35, radical 42. Question number 2. Step 1, use the FOIL method to expand the expression. The F in FOIL stands for first, so you multiply the first term in the first binomial times the first term in the second binomial. When you do so, you multiply the coefficients, so that gives you negative 5 times 8, which gives you negative 40. Then you multiply the radical terms. Radical 2 times radical 2 gives you the square root of 4, which is 2. Negative 40 times 2 is negative 80. You then multiply the outside terms. Negative 5 times negative 7 will give you a coefficient of positive 35. Then you multiply the radical terms. Radical 2 times radical 3 gives you the square root of 2 times 3, which is radical 6. Now that you've multiplied the first term by both of these terms, you then move on to the second term, and you're going to multiply this times each of these. So the next step is to multiply the inside terms. Positive 10 times positive 8 gives you a coefficient of positive 80. Multiplying the radicals gives you radical 3 times radical 2, which gives you the square root of 6. And then you multiply the last term in each binomial. Positive 10 times negative 7 gives us a coefficient of negative 70. And then when we multiply the radicals, we get radical 3 times radical 3, which gives you the square root of 9, which is 3. Negative 70 times 3 gives you negative 210. And now that we've expanded the expression with the FOIL method, we can simplify this by combining the like terms. When you do so, negative 80 minus 210 will give you negative 290. And positive 35 radical 6 plus 80 radical 6 will give you positive 115 radical 6. So the final answer is negative 290 plus 115 radical 6. And now question number 3. Step 1, use the FOIL method to expand the expression. F in FOIL is for first, so we multiply the first term in this binomial times the first term in this binomial. 3i times negative 4 will give us a coefficient of negative 12i. Radical 2 times radical negative 8 will give us radical negative 16. We then move on to O, outside. So we multiply 3i times positive 6i. 3 times 6 is 18. I times I is I squared. And then you multiply the radicals. Radical 2 times radical 2 gives you the square root of 4, which is 2. 18 times 2 is 36. Now we move to the second term, negative 5 radical negative 8, and you're going to multiply this times each term in this binomial. So I in FOIL stands for inside. Multiply this term times this term. Negative 5 times negative 4 gives you a coefficient of positive 20. Radical negative 8 times radical negative 8 gives you the square root of positive 64. The square root of 64 is 8. 20 times 8 is 160. And then L in FOIL is for last. So you multiply the last term in each of the binomials. Negative 5 times positive 6i gives us a coefficient of negative 30i. And radical negative 8 times radical 2 gives us the square root of negative 16. And now that we've expanded the expression using the FOIL method, we need to simplify this expression further. So we first want to get rid of the negatives in our radicals. We'll do so by removing the square root of negative 1, the imaginary term. When we do so, negative 12i times radical negative 16. We want to simplify this radical. We can break it up into its factors. Negative 1 times positive 16 gives us negative 16. So if you were to multiply these two radicals, you would get this one. Thus, you can break this radical up into these two radicals. By doing so, the square root of negative 1 is I. So we get I times I gives us I squared. So we get negative 12i squared times the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is 4. 4 times negative 12 is negative 48. So this becomes negative 48i squared. We bring 36i squared down. We bring 160 down. And we remove the imaginary unit from this negative radicand as well. Negative 16 is broken up into negative 1 times 16. The square root of negative 1 is I. So I times I will give us I squared. The square root of 16 is 4. Negative 30 times 4 is negative 120. So once we remove the imaginary unit from each negative radicand, we wind up with negative 48i squared plus 36i squared plus 160 minus 120i squared. So now we replace each I squared with negative 1. Negative 48 times negative 1 is positive 48. 36 times negative 1 is negative 36. And negative 120 times negative 1 is positive 120. 48 minus 36 plus 160 plus 120 equals 292.